Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Kim Storm. Kim has her master's in nutrition and is a UCI health dietitian at the Samueli.institute. Kim also serves as the dietitian for the Anaheim Ducks. Kim is with us today to talk about milk. With so many new varieties of milk, like almond, soy, and oat, it can be hard to keep track of what's best and what's really good for you. She will break down the latest research on dairy and if it does in fact do a body good. So with that, take it away, Kim.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Megan. I'm so glad that you guys are here joining me in my kitchen today. I wish that we were in beautiful Huntington by the water at Women's Wellness Day all in person, but hopefully this will be the next best thing, and I've really been looking forward to this morning, and I'm glad you guys are here. So I'm going to pull up our presentation now. I wanted to talk about dairy because I think in terms of any food group or type of group, dairy is the food that elicits the strongest emotional reactions, and also there's so much confusion around dairy. So today we're going to dive into a brief history of dairy, how the recommendations came to be, and then talk about some of the main controversies surrounding dairy, specifically around the lactose in dairy, calcium, how much do we really need, the fat and protein in dairy, are there hormones in dairy, do we need to pay attention to that, and organic dairy, should I buy it, is it worth the money? Then we're going to dive into some topics on plant-based milks because there's a dazzling array of options now, and we're going to close with some practical takeaways. So it's really my hope that today you guys are going to learn not only about the milk section in the grocery store, but also, how you can make decisions for your own health and well-being as to what products you can consume and what's really going to be best for you. So when it comes to dairy, dairy is an industry just like any other industry, and this industry has been around for a long time, and dairy farmers have wanted to grow and expand and make profits and provide more products. And they've done a really, really remarkable job at doing that. In fact, in 1970, the average amount of dairy farmers in the US, the number of farms was like 3. The number of dairy farms thanks for bearing with me, the number of dairy farms in the US has decreased drastically. There's only about 37,000 in the US now, and those farms that are left, not only have they gotten much larger, but the cows on those farms are producing almost double the amount of milk that they used to in the 70s. And I'm a new mom, and as a nursing mom, I can tell you the feat of producing double the amount of milk that you're supposed to is quite a feat indeed. So we're going to talk about how that came to be and if we should have any concerns about that. So when it comes to nutrition guidelines, I don't know if you guys have ever wondered where this advice comes from or where mainstream advice is originating. And the dietary guidelines for Americans are nationwide, government-funded nutrition recommendations designed to keep everyone in the United States healthy. So these recommendations started in the 70s, and they're renewed every 5 years. So in 1977, when the first dietary guidelines for Americans were released, there was no mention of dairy or milk at all, no specific advice for what to consume. So the Dairy Board figured it'd be important to include dairy as part of a helpful recommendation for these guidelines. And so in 1992, they made the first specific recommendation of identifying dairy as its own separate, distinct food group. They said dairy makes a really important contribution to the health of Americans. It's high in protein. It contains calcium and minerals like magnesium and zinc and vitamins like riboflavin. And so for the health of the general population, it's really best if adults consume at least 2 servings of dairy a day. Now, fast forward to 2005, and in an amazing feat of lobbying, the dairy recommendation was actually increased to 3 servings a day. That's a 50% increase. And there was an article released from the Wall Street Journal around this time. It was an investigative report, and it said that, you know, this was one of the greatest feats of any lobbying industry at all, that this recommendation not only caused people to consume more dairy, but also caused an amazing surge in profits in 2005 as well. So I know there's a lot going on in 2020, but something to look forward to is that we have new dietary guidelines coming out this year. So it'll be really interesting to see what the national recommendation is on dairy and other foods this year. And dairy farmers have a huge sway and a really big vested interest in making sure that we all know the benefits of dairy and what it does for our body. And so the USDA started a dairy checkoff program, which basically means that any dairy farmer has to contribute 15 cents for every 100 pounds of milk that they sell. And it goes into this national pool of funds that's used for development of research and also marketing and promoting dairy products as well. So in 2005, the checkoff program generated about $160 million for public education and research purposes. And in 2016, that checkoff profit is up to $415 million. So there's a lot of energy going into educating us about milk and dairy and the benefits of dairy. And if you think that you're immune to advertising and marketing and research about dairy, you're wrong, because I'm sure every single one of you on here has seen these advertisements or heard got milk. And what some of that dairy checkoff money went into is, in the 1980s, there was a campaign started, and it was called Milk, It Does a Body Good. But the one that really lodged milk into global consciousness was the Got Milk campaign. I don't think there's been a more successful advertising campaign. In between 1993, when Got Milk first started, in between 2014, the sales in milk increased tremendously from, oh my gosh, $19.6 billion to $35 billion over that period from the Got Milk campaign. Got Milk was retired in 2014 and replaced by the new slogan, Milk Life, if any of you have seen it. And Milk Life is really more focused on the protein content in milk and how important protein is and how we all need to be getting more protein in our diet to power us through our days. So as you can see, you know, there's various pressures to increase milk recommendations, and you know, these make very obvious business sense, but the question of whether or not they make scientific sense based on the literature or nutritional sense is definitely debatable. And so today we're going to dive into those 4 main debates around dairy. The first one on lactose, the sugar in milk, then calcium. We're going to talk about dairy fat. Is that something we really should eat less of and eat low fat? And then hormones as well. Does dairy contain hormones, and do those affect human health, and do I need to be concerned about that? So lactose. Lactose is a sugar in milk, and it's a double bonded sugar that takes a very special enzyme called lactase to snip it in half so that it can be digested and absorbed in our gut. And it's no surprise that most people actually cannot digest dairy. So if you've ever felt kind of rumbly or bloated or had any kind of GI symptoms or maybe skin symptoms when you've digested dairy, that's a sign that maybe you're not producing a lot of that lactase enzyme. And when we're born as babies, we actually produce a fair amount of lactase enzyme to digest milk, mother's milk that is. But by the age of 5, most kids are not producing any lactase enzyme, or if they are producing any, it's very, very small. Your genetics plays a role in how well you can digest or handle dairy products. If you're of Northern European descent, you're more likely to produce more lactase and digest dairy better. But about 75% of the world's populations, Asians, Southeast Asians, Native Americans, Middle Easterners, actually cannot digest dairy well. And in fact, this was such a big issue that in 2000, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine actually filed a lawsuit against the government saying that this blanket recommendation for every American to consume 2 to 3 servings of dairy a day are actually misplaced, because guess what? A majority of Americans can't even digest dairy. So the dairy industry had an answer for that, and there's now products called Lactaid or lactose-free dairy products. So those who do not produce the enzyme can consume and enjoy dairy. So if you are one of those people who doesn't digest dairy very well, the good news is if you do enjoy it and you do like it, there are options and ways you can navigate around the lactose issue. One is either by going to your doctor and getting tested to see if you are lactose sensitive or not, so you can know how to proceed. And the second is knowing that there's varying concentrations of the lactose sugar in different dairy products. So some have a really high amount, like milk or canned condensed milk or evaporated milk. Some are more moderate in their lactose content, like whipping cream, sour cream, ice cream, buttermilk. So you may be able to tolerate those in small amounts. And then some dairy products are actually really low in lactose, like aged cheese, butter, ghee, whey isolate, protein powder. So when it comes to dairy and lactose, I think it's important that we're not making these one-size-fits-all recommendations and either saying all these foods are bad or everything is good and you should just disregard any symptoms you have and eat foods even if they don't sit well with you. So hopefully this chart's kind of helpful for navigating how you can get around the lactose issue. Our second concern with dairy is an issue that the USDA checkoff program has promoted really, really heavily. And that's the idea that milk contains calcium, and calcium is the most concentrated mineral in our bones. So we need lots of calcium to build strong bones. So milk is the essential, most perfect food for doing that. And there's definitely debate in the nutrition world as to whether or not that's true. The USDA set the recommendation in the United States for adults to aim for 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams of calcium per day to prevent osteoporosis and keep your bones healthy and strong. But as you can see on this chart, calcium comes from both dairy foods, and it's also in almost every single occurring plant food on the planet. It's just a lot more concentrated in dairy foods. To meet this recommendation of 1,000 milligrams a day takes a really concerted effort if you're not eating dairy. So you could easily meet that recommendation with 2 to 3 servings of dairy a day, but if you're not eating dairy, buckle up because you've got 10 cups of black beans coming your way, or you're gonna have to rely on a supplement to meet that recommendation. And so there's been debate that, with this level set so high, is that actually what we need for strong, healthy bones? And when we look at population data of how much calcium are people consuming on a daily basis around the globe, it kind of confounds things, because what we see is that you can see in the United States here is bright green. So the average dietary daily calcium intake in the US is about 900 to 1,000 milligrams per day. But in countries in Asia and Southeast Asia, they're consuming much, much less, maybe 400 milligrams, 500 milligrams, or even less. And what's confounding is that we see in those parts of the world where cow's milk is not a staple of the diet and calcium intakes are lower, people have less osteoporosis and fewer bone fractures. So when it comes to milk and strong bones, it's really important that we avoid what's called nutrition reductionism. And this is taking basically a nutrient, a vitamin, a mineral, a macronutrient out of context and saying that it plays this really important role in a certain outcome. Like calcium is essential for bone health. So milk, because it's highest in calcium, is the best. Because doing that can be kind of misleading. And what we know now is that bone is constantly turning over. Calcium and minerals are coming in, calcium and minerals are going out to support the body. And so one of the best ways you can support bone health is by helping offset the balance of making sure you're getting enough minerals and nutrients coming into your body to build strong bones, and also supporting lifestyle behaviors that are going to offset or minimize that loss as much as possible. So the things that help support your bones are getting enough dietary protein from plant or animal sources, magnesium-rich foods from greens, beans, and nuts, maintaining adequate vitamin D status above levels of 40, eating vitamin K-rich foods, which are your dark leafy greens. Your gut probiotics also produce vitamin K. Eating boron-rich foods, which is a mineral found in fruits, veggies, and nuts, and eating phosphorus, which is also high in veggies as well. And then addressing any lifestyle factors that may be contributing to excess calcium losses, like smoking, excessive sugar intake, consuming soda, stress, too much caffeine, poor diet. And so the take-home message is that a high intake of calcium alone is not the only thing we need to prevent low bone density. Which brings us to our third milk and dairy controversy. And in 2016, this Time cover came out, and I love butter as much as you all do. But when I saw this really provocative cover, I just couldn't believe it. This article suggests that eating butter has no implication at all in overall mortality, heart disease, or diabetes. And they make this claim that, where the science is wrong about saturated fat, is everything we know about nutrition untrue? Is the world unraveling? And I just want to help you guys see that anytime you read an article in the media about nutrition, and maybe they're taking the angle that, everyone in science got it wrong, or we thought this for a long period of time, but now that's not true. It's a red flag to be skeptical. Maybe the scientists got it wrong, and maybe the entire body of research is wrong, but it's probably more likely that the science is still incomplete. So when it comes to dairy fat, these are the four most evidence-based recommendations that they're not snazzy, so they're probably not going to make headlines, but they are going to be good for your overall health. And that is that we know that replacing saturated fat from animal foods like butter and meat with polyunsaturated fats from foods like nuts and seeds and avocados and healthy oils lowers the risk of heart attack and cardiovascular events. So unfortunately, despite what the Times says and despite what Bulletproof Coffee says, butter's still a worse choice for heart health than those healthy poly and monounsaturated fats. And this goes back to that idea of nutrition reductionism as well. When we focus on a single food, we kind of miss the point, because someone could eat butter but lead a really healthy lifestyle and have lower overall saturated fat intakes in their typical diet, just like someone could eat a handful of almonds every day but be consuming high amounts of trans fats, lead a sedentary lifestyle, smoke cigarettes. So it's really, really hard to do well formulated nutrition studies looking at just a single food. So when it comes to heart health, eat plenty of those healthy plant-based fats and enjoy butter if you like it in moderation, of course. Next to the dairy fat issue is looking at protein. What if you have a milk allergy? And so milk and dairy products contain about 5 different proteins that can cause an allergic reaction if you're sensitive to them. And it's pretty clear if you are sensitive to dairy, maybe you'll get a constriction in your throat or a rash or wheezing or hives. So that's pretty clear and not something that is generally confusing. But sometimes dairy can actually cause what's called like a cross-reactivity. So your body produces antibodies to the dairy proteins, and then these antibodies can sometimes go on to contribute to the development of autoimmune conditions. So with many of our patients who have autoimmune conditions, removing dairy from the diet is something that can sometimes be helpful and a tool that we'll use. It's important to note too that if you've been breastfed as a baby, the chance of developing a reaction to cow's milk goes down, and the reaction of autoimmune conditions goes down as well. And, in an age where you can order food sensitivity tests for yourself online and do all sorts of self-diagnosing, we do discourage self-diagnosing when it comes to food allergies, because that can lead to unnecessary restriction and missing out on certain foods in your diet. So be sure to meet with your doctor or dietitian about food allergies. So the fourth issue that we're going to talk about with dairy is the hormone hang up. And this is something that's just so crazy, you guys. So how many of you have looked on a carton of milk and seen these two statements side by side? The first statement says, "This milk is from cows not treated with RBST." And then right below that, or right next to it, it will say, "The Food and Drug Administration has determined that there's no significant difference in milk from cows treated with RBST and from non-RBST treated cows." It's such a peculiar set of statements, to say the least, because they're very contradictory. Either this RBST cow growth hormone matters to human health, or it doesn't. So we're going to find out if it does or if it doesn't matter. And we're going to go back and look at a little bit of dairy history to figure that out. So again, as dairy farmers, we're trying to figure out how can we produce more milk to meet the demands of these increased recommendations and the increased demand for dairy in our country. And they found that if you inject cows every 2 weeks with growth hormone, that can up the milk production by 20% up to 50%. So Monsanto, a large agricultural company, created a genetically modified recombinant bovine growth hormone, or RBST. And so Monsanto petitioned for this artificial growth hormone to be approved by the FDA. And they also wanted to make sure that the RBST, artificial hormone, didn't have to be labeled on the milk. And at the time, the FDA said, okay, you're right, we're going to approve this drug because it doesn't seem to be any different than the naturally occurring growth hormone that we see in cows. And at the time, with the analysis, you couldn't tell a difference between the two in blood. So in 1993, the use of the hormone's approved, and cow producers can start using it to increase their milk production. Now, some dairy farmers didn't want to use the hormone, and so they started labeling on their own the milk BST free, so that consumers would know, okay, this hasn't been treated with artificial hormones. Now, Monsanto went into a fit, and they brought this to the attention of the FDA and said, shock and horror, if consumers see this, they might start to think that there's issues with the hormone treated milk. So we really need to address this labeling issue. So just a year later, the FDA ended up siding with Monsanto, and they said, okay, dairy producers, you can keep that label saying your milk is RBST free, but you have to put it in the context that the FDA has not seen any problem or any difference with the RBST treated milk. So it really begs the question of, is this milk safe or not? Because we're getting very conflicting messages when we look at the packaging of food. So there's a few things to think about, is that, the naturally occurring bovine growth hormone and the recombinant Monsanto version are very, very alike in structure. So much so alike that when you do a blood test, you can't distinguish the difference in the cow or in the milk either. These growth hormones are also different than human growth hormones too. And so the concern that if I consume cow growth hormone, is it going to somehow affect my own pattern of growth? And that doesn't appear to be the case. These growth hormones, they're proteins, and they're mostly broken down by stomach acid in the stomach before entering our bloodstream. So there's that aspect to think about. But still, there are some concerns. And the first concern is related around antibiotic use, because as dairy producers were using this growth hormone, unfortunately, there was a side effect that with the more growth hormone you use in a cow, the more likely she is to have udder infections. So this has led to an increased dependence on antibiotics. And antibiotics can actually get into the milk. And so then when we drink the milk, the antibiotics are entering our system and they may affect the friendly bacteria living in our intestinal tract. And the second issue with the RBST treated milk is related to a hormone called IGF-1. And so many acronyms. RBST can increase levels of IGF-1 in milk. And now IGF-1 in cow's milk is identical to the human form of IGF-1. So there's a possibility that by drinking milk that contains more IGF-1, it may raise human levels of IGF-1. Fortunately, though, it is a protein, so most of it gets destroyed by stomach acid and as you digest dairy products. But it is possible that maybe some gets absorbed, and we know there's a small correlation between elevated IGF-1 levels and a modest increased risk of cancer of the prostate for men and breast cancer for premenopausal women. So I think the RBST treated milk definitely does have some cause for concern. With that being said, though, it is important to note that IGF-1 levels are also dependent on your body weight, activity level, and other genetic factors. So it's hard to tease out the specific direct influence that dairy has on that aspect. So because consumers were starting to become concerned about the antibiotic and hormone use in dairy, fortunately, there is an answer to that. If you are concerned about those aspects of dairy products, you can drink organic milk. Organic milk is going to be antibiotic and growth hormone free. There's a slight nutritional difference between the two. The dairy products that are raised organically are slightly higher in the anti-inflammatory omega-3s. But as far as protein and other mineral and vitamin concentration, they're pretty similar. There's maybe a marginal difference at best. So at the end of the day, should I choose organic or not? Possibly for the antibiotic and the hormone reasons, but from a nutritional standpoint, there's not a large difference. And if milk is increasing any health risks, the increase is probably small, but also if milk has benefits like the dairy industry wants to promote, these are probably a lot smaller too than what's being advertised. So I wanted to share one quick resource with you guys. It's called the Cornucopia Organic Dairy Scorecard. You can go onto their website and put in your favorite brand of dairy products, and it will give you a scorecard based on sustainability, based on use of hormones and antibiotics. You can actually get a deeper dive into some of the more popular commercial brands out there. When the dairy board decided to start promoting organic, they did a great job. If we look at the growth of organic dairy product sales, it's absolutely astounding. So in 1990, there were only 2,000 cows making organic milk in the United States. And then fast forward to 2016, we have almost 300,000 cows making organic milk. And that industry has gone from about $500 million worth of sales in 1990 to the organic dairy industry produces in 2017 $6.5 billion. So it's just astronomical, the growth that's occurred. So if you don't like dairy products, or maybe you're lactose intolerant, or maybe you have concerns about the hormones, or maybe organic milk and dairy products are too expensive, fortunately, there are alternative options, and the plant-based milks are thriving. They are the rising stars of the dairy section. Back in the 1990s, soy milk was the first plant-based milk that made its way onto the shelves, and now it's just exploded in varieties. We have almond, coconut, hemp, rice, cashew milk. And so I want to get clear on some of the differences between plant-based milks and dairy-based milk products. And So when we look at you can see on the screen the breakdown of the nutrients in 1 cup of cow's milk versus 1 cup of almond milk. And the dairy people love to point out the fact that, you're missing out so much when you drink plant-based milk because you're not getting as much protein, you're not getting as much fat or the calories or energy from the product. And I think that's a little bit of a moot point, if you will, because, we drink plant-based milk alternatives for different reasons. Most people are getting their protein needs met and don't necessarily rely on dairy or dairy products to get their protein needs met. And if you are struggling to get your protein needs met, that's a good reason to meet with a dietitian. And also, if you have any dairy sensitivity, it's great that there's like a whole world of opportunities for you to enjoy milk-like products without feeling terrible and having reactions. So it is important to note, though, that plant-based milks, they do have fewer calories. So that's something to keep in mind. They have less protein and some contain a few less vitamins and minerals. Most are fortified with vitamins and minerals. Most plant-based milks actually have calcium added back into them. Some people are concerned about some of the emulsifying agents with plant-based milks. They'll see like guar gum and some of the thickeners like carrageenan and be a little put off by that. I think the only one that is maybe potentially should be further investigated is carrageenan. At least in animal models, it can lead to some gut disruptions. So a lot of plant-based companies are actually taking that thickener out of their products, but we'll see how that unfolds in years to come. I wanted to share one quick story, though. This is kind of an ongoing feud between the dairy industry and the plant-based industry right now. And there's this big debate over who gets to use milk on the label. And the dairy industry says that, by using almond milk, it's completely mislabeling the product, and that food identity standards are what are at stake. And we really need the FDA to police this definition of, what is milk and what isn't milk. The plant-based industry responds to that and says, okay, calling almond milk doesn't deceive anyone. They're not shocked that a cow is not involved in the production of a plant-based milk. And then I think that the dairy industry maybe does have one good point, saying that, even if people aren't necessarily confused or think that their milk is coming from somewhere that it's not, the term milk does evoke a certain nutritional profile that plant alternatives differ from. So that just means, become educated on what's in your food, read labels, and know how to fuel your body well, and you'll be just fine. Because at the end of the day, there's certain foods that I think are not confusing at all. I mean, no one's confused about peanut butter not being butter. So in summary, you guys, these are my main points for how to think about dairy, is that, when it comes to milk and dairy products, they can be foods that get really guttural reactions from people. But let's just remember, they're just foods. There's nothing really all that special about them. All the nutrients that you can find in dairy, you can also get from whole plant foods. And with that being said, dairy products, they're not essential, and they're also not a perfect food, especially not for humans. But they're also not poison. You don't have to consume dairy products to be healthy, but if you do like them and enjoy them, you can absolutely do so and stay healthy. And with the abundance of variety of plant-based milks, they do have a different nutritional profile. So read the label to see what's in yours and enjoy the fact that we have a lot of options.